Hello, everyone. I'm Gwen Callahan, one of the co-directors of the HP Lovecraft Film Festival, and I am so honored to be joined by Cass Pasha and St. Joshi. Cass is the writer, director, producer of the documentary that you hopefully just watched, Exegesis Lovecraft. And St. Joshi is has been a frequent guest at the festival and is one of the preeminent Lovecraft scholars. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Glad to be here.
Thank you for having the film. I think I mentioned this before, but it's been a long time dream of mine to have the film premiere here. So it's one to knock off the bucket list. So thank you for making that happen.
Well, thank you for making such a wonderful film and really putting a personal and relatable spin on a question and topic that's really kind of a tough, a challenging subject for a lot of us. Um, where you talk about it a little bit in the film, about why you wanted to explore this facet of Lovecraft and Lovecraft fandom. um, is that something that emerged after as you did your interviews, or is that something that you kind of had in mind to begin
Sure.
with?
Yeah, I can talk to that. ST's long suffered because of this, because what happened was this all started from a very like personal issue where I wanted to make a thesis film. And at the end of my thesis film, it's not a very, I mean, it's not bad. It's not the greatest film ever made. Let's just leave it at that. But like in that film, it's like set in like a post-apocalyptic Toronto, and my ending was supposed to be a giant Lovecraftian monster. And when I presented that to my professor, he immediately scratched that page out and was like, well, this is ridiculous. We're not doing this. And this is a very like a political film. So let's just stick to that. So I had a real like personal itch of like, I got to make a Lovecraftian film. And then after I graduated, I was like, hey, you know what? I've been wrong. I really want to do it. I was reading about Lovecraft in Quebec, and I was looking at grants, right? Like in Canada, and it's a very mercenary approach to filmmaking, I suppose. But like they're always, it's called like CanCon. They love giving money to Canadian stories, obviously, right? And I was like, whoa, no one's done a film about Lovecraft's time in Quebec, and I just reached out to ST, and ST, you're a saint, super nice guy. He immediately replied to a guy with no filmography, nothing, and was like, oh yeah, if you're going to Quebec, I would love to help you with that. And he immediately started giving me like ideas, tips, and so initially we went to Quebec. That was the initial impetus for the film, right? And then it kind of got well, what happened in Quebec, you'll notice as well, it's constantly raining. And poor ST, I put him through the ringer there too, where I was making him go through. One time his umbrella got blown off by a really powerful gust of wind. So ST, super nice guy that he is, messaged me after that trip. He's like, I feel so bad because it's constantly raining and stuff. So if you ever want to do some more shooting, I'm always down. Like if you want to do Quebec again, or I go on research trips if you want to do filming again. And I was like, after that, I kind of got the itch. I was like, well, why stop at Quebec? And if you read the Quebec texts, so it's actually quite a wonderful piece of writing that going over it with ST, I was like, it's very nice. It's like going to the same places as Lovecraft writes about. It's very interesting because you'll go to a place and it's like a battlement in Quebec City. But then when he writes about it, it's like, oh, this is the battlement where General Wolfe fought the Catholic French, it destroyed this priest-ridden province. I was like, oh, it gets very interesting, right? But so yeah, that was like a real joy. So, but even in that, can't escape it. Like he wrote it, I think it's like in the early 30s. There are some like racial elements, which was like, I was like, oh, maybe it's kind of interesting to explore. It kind of bothered me. And then ST was like, well, you know what? We can go to the source, go to Quebec, go to New York. And I was able to pitch this we have kind of a documentary festival here called Hot Docs. And I pitched that, and they gave me a little bit of money, not a lot. Like this is I hope you'll probably notice it's a very low budget film, but they gave me enough that we could go to New York, go to Providence, and just kind of went rolling from there. And yeah, it's all thanks to ST always being very nice to me, basically.
Well, I'll have to say that I jumped at the chance of Quebec because I'd never been there before. And I always like to follow Lovecraft's footsteps wherever he went because you learn so much. I mean, obviously Providence, New York, the obvious places where he lived and wrote about. But there's so much more. I mean, Lovecraft, was like an incredible traveler. I mean, way more than actually that I've done. Although, of course, I've gotten overseas and he never did. But he was determined to look up all these sites, and he read so much about them, and he learned the history and all the background, so that he was a very educated uh, traveler. He knew what he was looking at when he got there. And of course, his prejudices come out. I mean, they always do. Whose doesn't, Um, but and there have been other documentaries on Lovecraft, but I said, you have the chance, Cass, to do a film that nobody else has done before. That is not just following Lovecraft's footsteps, but making a kind of narrative about how places affected Lovecraft as a person and as a writer. That's why we went to New York. We looked up, did we actually go to Red Hook? I think we might have.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, some much in the
it's a
film,
little.
but
It's not quite the same as in Lovecraft's day, but it's still kind of a seedy area. Obviously we looked at Providence all over. We went to all across the state of Massachusetts, the Quabbin Reservoir, where basically the color out of space is set. In Boston, where Pickman's model is set. And it's like places meant a lot more to Lovecraft than people did. That's just the way he was. And so, seeing these places, at first hand and showing them to everybody else who may only know Lovecraft from his writings, I think adds a real dimension to Lovecraft that people haven't gotten before.
yeah, and even just rereading some stories before this to get in the zone a little bit. But there's so much of Lovecraft where he is describing like the architecture of a place, right? Like so much of I don't know. It is. My father was an architect, so I'm always been interested in it. But like, yeah, there is something. He always centers you in a place, right? That's like architecturally, like what a building is and stuff. And I mean, I didn't put titles. Maybe I should have done that later. But when we were walking in Providence, you can see we film like where the shutter, like where Call of Cthulhu is kind of set, and like different stories are set. And it's I don't know, even going to Providence, right? Like it's a college town and stuff. You're walking, it's very nice, scenic place. But then when you're reading like a Lovecraft story where he's describing the place and then you're in the place, I don't know, it's something very magical kind of happens. Like he centers everything in history. So it's like this place is important historically because this happened here, and the architecture was this. And he's a good. I mean, had things turned out differently, he probably would have been a good travel writer. But
Absolutely. And
yeah,
in fact, one of the things I enjoy doing most is, as we set up our itinerary and going to various places, I culled through Lovecraft's letters and other writings too, essays, and got out these excerpts describing the exact places where we were or where we would go, and reading his description, you are literally seeing things through his eyes, even though places may have changed over the years. The Pickman's model stuff is pretty much, wouldn't say all gone, but a lot of it is gone. In fact, even gone in his own day. The very year after he wrote Pickman's model, he took Donald Wandrite to that place in Boston, the North End, and even then, a lot of it was gone. But nevertheless, his descriptions remain, and you can get an inkling of what went through his mind as he came upon these places for the first time.
yeah,
Um, and it's amazing to think when he said he went to Marblehead, Massachusetts in late 1922, and he was totally enraptured. And 8 years later, he says, "It was the high point of my life." I mean, think of it. What that means. This was after his marriage, after his horrible New York visit. Return to Providence, writing the Call of Cthulhu and whatever else. But that visit to Marblehead, the high point of his life, it just shows you what places meant to him, because he could look at a place and sort of insert himself into the whole historical era and understand the background of how that place had come to be over the centuries. Very historic minded person, and that comes out mostly in his letters, his travel letters, but also in some of his fiction, because his fiction is full of historical antecedents. You're not just in a place; you're in a moment of history, and in Lovecraft's view, a very insignificant moment of history, you know, because the past is enormous and vastly overwhelms us as insignificant creatures of the present. He actually echoed, I shouldn't say echoed because I think he came up with it independently, um, when he said, "The past is real. It is all there is." You know, William Faulkner said something similar to that, but they obviously came up with their things independently. But that's what the past meant to Lovecraft. He wanted to immerse himself into the past. In fact, he had thought of writing a book, you know, of his, you know, kind of travel antiquarian pieces called "On the Trail of the Past." He never did because he did, you know, it didn't happen. But that's kind of his perspective on places.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
inter-
that's, oh, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's interesting that you, Cass and ST, talk about how Lovecraft kind of centers his writing and it sounds like his life in places with like contextual, like giving those places context. And um, we think of him as, you know, the bridge between, you know, classic Gothic horror and modern horror. So it's interesting to me that then we also see him doing that with the places that he's in. He's the bridge for you to that location's past. And for him, that location was the bridge to the historical past for Lovecraft. So I find it interesting that there's all those parallels in there with his writing and his love of architecture and visiting historic places.
I will
Yeah,
say that I myself found a lot of I found myself very moved, especially at the beginning when Cass went into his own background and you know his feelings of sort of alienation, leaving Pakistan and coming to Canada and not feeling that he belonged. I had a very different experience. I have to confess. I fit into my environment a lot better. I suppose I don't know why it just happened that way. You know, I guess because I was even younger. I was only 5 years old when I came to this country, into the Midwest, and you know, my parents being professors, we settled in university towns, and um, I fit in because I basically unwittingly maybe shed my Indian heritage and just became, you know, just an ordinary American boy. At least that's how I conceived of it. You know, watching football games and you know playing baseball and you know whatever else. But early on, also I became a reader, and I didn't discover Lovecraft until I was maybe 13 or 14 or thereabouts. But he did take me into this different world, and that and Cass, you can relate to that. And I became so totally obsessed, you know, even by the age of 15, 16, 17, I was wanting to do scholarship on Lovecraft. Now, you know, didn't have the first idea of how to do it, but it's kind of what I wanted to do because I felt that he was this unrecognized author who was getting popular, you know, with the paperback editions coming out. But I wanted even then, this is like the mid '70s, to try to do something to elevate him in the eyes of other people. And basically, I've spent my whole life doing that, and it's been to me very rewarding.
yeah, it get the, I don't know why that happens. Like it is weird. I guess it's like maybe it's being a fan part of it, but like sometimes, and as you will probably notice this too, there is like I'll it's, you think H.P. Lovecraft is very mainstream, right? Until you try and raise money for an H.P. Lovecraft film. I'll tell you, then people go approach priests like, "Do you like H.P. Lovecraft?" They're like, "No, actually, I haven't read a book in like 20 years." So I'm like, okay, well, I'm not getting any money out of this. But then when you do encounter other Lovecraft fans, it is kind of a special thing because it's like it is a very diverse fandom in a way. But also, I get like, I don't know, like, yeah, in the film I do confront like Lovecraft's issues, but it's I'm very protective of him in some ways, where some people will be like, I don't know, I had a friend recently who's like, oh, you know, Arthur Machen is a much better writer. And I was like, come on, because like if you start comparing, Arthur Machen has a lot of hits, but he also has a lot of misses. I mean, I think Lovecraft is much, if there were albums, like Lovecraft's albums would have much more killer tracks, where Arthur Machen would have a lot of filler, you know? And but there is this kind of like trend to be like, oh, H.P. Lovecraft is not a great writer. He's actually conceptually an interesting writer. But like there are other writers who've done better work as writing. And for me, I'm like, no, I think he's actually pretty interesting as a writer because, like I said, it's, and I think Steve Maricano talks about it. It's like a being in a detective thing where it's like, yeah, when we went to Craven, like the Craven Reservoir. I didn't know that the Craven Reservoir, they in the New Deal or close to the New Deal, I guess, they actually sunk a whole bunch of towns there, right? So I was like, oh, there's like a historical. He's tying in all this weird kind of history and like I don't know, like when you study a work, right, like a song from the 60s, you look at the 60s and be like, oh, this is how music production was then, or this is what they were singing about the Vietnam War, right? Like you understand the context of the time the song was produced, and that makes the song more interesting. And that's the same thing with Lovecraft. When you just the stories by themselves are amazing, but when you understand the context of what he was trying to do, like writing these pulp novels, which and no one really cared about, but then there's so much detail and research and so much care put into it. How can you not? I don't know. In some way, admire it, right? Like it's like if you came the modern equivalent of like if you found a blog today that maybe 100 people had read, and the blog is immaculately researched and really great stories. Wouldn't that just blow you away that was happening? Like, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's why I'm so determined to get Lovecraft's letters published, because to my mind, they actually are his greatest achievement as a writer. Uh, to say nothing of the fact that they dwarf the entirety of his output, many times over. I mean, our edition of the collected letters will be like 25 volumes, and we've done about 17, 18 of them already, and the others will come in the next couple of years. But they're the things that reveal all the stuff that went into writing these stories. It was not just matters of imagination. I mean, of course, he had a great imagination, but he read a lot. Some people, one critic actually said he read too much because he was too much influenced by other people. I'm not sure about that, but I mean, he definitely was influenced by a lot of people. But I think he always transmuted what he took from others and made it his own. But his life experience, which basically wasn't all that much. I mean, he never had a job, really speaking. He didn't go out into the world all that much, except on these incredible travels that he did. Nevertheless, almost everything about his life somehow works its way into his fiction. His fiction really is among the most autobiographical that you'll ever encounter. Only maybe because we have all these letters and can sort of cross-reference them with the fiction and say, oh, okay, the reason why this is there is because he went to this spot and things like this. I mean, at the Mountains of Madness, it seems like the most remote thing that a New England could have written, set in Antarctica, and yet there's a mention of Quebec in there, isn't there? Uh, and he couldn't have made that one, sort of toss-off comment about Quebec unless he'd actually been to Quebec and seen the ramparts that made him think, okay, what if I transfer this to this remote area of Antarctica, and it makes this connection that you could never have made unless you've actually been there. His work is full of all this sort of stuff, and that's why it can be studied in such incredible detail. I mean, the amount of scholarship on Lovecraft is like so immense now. It's unbelievable how much people have been digging into his work and will continue to dig into his work over the years.
Yeah, I do. And I'll confess I haven't read all the letters. I've been making my way through. I should have for this film. But like, that's the other thing, like Lovecraft, right? For some reason, I just expected him to not be funny, like a funny guy. But when you read the letters, even the Quebec travelogue was, I think, intended just for himself. It was never intended for publication. So it's basically like a diary.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some weird stuff. I mean, this is so bizarre. Where in the middle of that, he'll be like, "Hail Victoria," these long passages. I'm like, what is? And I was talking to see, it's a joke. Like he's like kind of making fun of like British nationalism in a way, but like also being a part of it. But I'm like, yeah, he's a very weird and he's just a weird guy. And even when like he takes like obviously he has some really disgusting political positions earlier in his life, but even later on when he kind of becomes more interested in like socialism or in the New Deal and stuff, it's not like he's really into Lenin. He always approaches things from a very unique, very odd kind of angle, and it's kind of it's fun to read. It's like if you were at a dinner party with him, he would be a very weird guy to sit next to, but I think you would have a good time. It's like very dry humor.
And the fact that he was basically self-educated, I mean, it just speaks wonders. It's like volumes about how he kept learning. I mean, this was a high school dropout, for God's sake. He couldn't even get a high school diploma, couldn't go to Brown University as he had always wanted to. He called himself a non-university barbarian and alien. He was so deeply ashamed of his lack of formal education, and yet he read so much. I mean, and he processed that information to come up not only just it is not just that he had a bunch of facts in his head. He incorporated all that information and made a philosophy out of it. He read science, he read philosophy, he read history, he read literature, and through that whole process, he came up with a view of the world that I personally find very compelling, in a lot of ways. Aside from the racism, you can sort of put that aside,
Of course.
because we don't need to go into that. But uh, you know, I personally was greatly inspired by his atheism. He wrote a lot about atheism in a manner that compelled me to say, "Yeah, guy, you're right. You're absolutely right." And so that has influenced me a lot. His love of the past has influenced me a lot. I myself became kind of a student of the 18th century, both the literature and the architecture, and I loved going to all these places that he went to in throughout New England, because it was such a revelation for me, growing up in the Midwest, which is not one of the older parts of the country, and there's nothing like that out there. No gambrel roofed structures there. To come to New England and see all this stuff and see it through Lovecraft's own eyes, was such a revelation. So he has influenced my own intellectual development in so many different ways, and I would like to thank him for it somehow.
Yeah, I think he had almost like a pattern where I noticed in travelogue, he'll go to the oldest part of town and then he'll talk about like the first settlers and stuff. I don't know. It's a very interesting approach to just read him as a travelogue guy. And like, man, STU must have done this too. We never really talked about it, but like I find it almost, well, you might find it possible, but like I find it almost impossible to predict if he hadn't died, right? If he had lived longer, let's say he died pretty fairly young. Like if he had lived to the 60s and 70s, his trajectory, I don't know, like because he would have seen his writing blow up, right? By the time like the 60s, I mean, it was obscure, but he wasn't that obscure. And presuming he'd been writing newer works, you would have presumed that if he hadn't died, he would have found success eventually, I imagine,
I,
in the 50s or
I
60s.
think he would have, yes. And again, he would have kept on growing, kept on learning. He was never stationary. Assuming he kept his health, that's the important thing. The reason he died was that his health just deteriorated. But if he had somehow managed to ward off the cancer and live to a fairly normal life, into his 70s or 80s even, he would have kept on writing because writing was so integral to his whole way of life. I mean, he felt he was nothing if he wasn't a writer, and would have absorbed all this new information and changed his outlook on a number of ways. It's actually amazing how much he changed his attitude, as you talked about his politics. Began as an extreme conservative and moved all the way to what I call moderate socialism, which is non-Marxist socialism, and didn't certainly was in favor of the New Deal, but wanted the New Deal to go even farther. He didn't think New Deal was quite bold enough, even though just as now FDR was getting attacked by for being a socialist and all this sort of thing. Well, I think we need another New Deal right now, and I hope it's going to happen. But so it's pretty remarkable how generally open-minded Lovecraft was. There were only a few instances, and unfortunately, race is one of them, where he didn't question himself, didn't question his own attitudes, and wasn't willing to adapt. In many other instances, he was open to new evidence, and that's one of the most admirable things about him.
Yeah, and I did notice from the letters, to take a step back, like he loves like ice cream, and like you can tell he doesn't know how to cook and stuff, right? Which I can obviously relate to. But like yeah, he's just eating like terribly throughout. Like when he mentions food, and I was like, oh man, he did do himself in with that habit, because he did that with stomach
Yeah,
cancer, right?
his diet was terrible, and
It's like
I
yeah,
have to
donuts and
believe. I
ice
mean,
cream is
there's
constantly. I'm
well,
just
it's yeah, he got no vegetables and no fruits. It's like,
yeah.
oh man. I mean, they didn't know as much about diet as they do now, of course.
I mean,
Uh,
I don't have that
and
excuse. That's
a
totally
lot of
true.
it was poverty. He said, "Oh, I eat 2 meals a day by preference. I don't, never have a third meal." Well, it wasn't by preference. It was because he had no money, and
Yeah.
less money along, as time went on. In fact, there's a very poignant comment when he sort of by accident, actually he himself didn't do it. His friends sold At the Mountains of Madness and Shadow Out of Time to Astounding Stories in late 1935, and he got like $600 for them, which basically was his average income for a year. That would carry him for a year. Think about it. Um, and he said, when he made those sales, he said, I had never been closer to the breadline than at that moment. He was in very dire straits, and yet he looked at it almost as a game. It was kind of a contest to see how cheaply can I keep on living, as long as I can have a roof over my head and my books and whatnot. I mean, food is the one thing he could kind of
Yeah, and
go
I
easy
noticed
on.
that during the travel stuff too. It's just sleeping in bus stations, going to the
Sleeping
YMCA. It's
on
like,
buses
yeah,
sometimes.
sleeping on, but
Yeah,
and
and yet
that is a brutal.
it's just
It
amazing.
is
And yet,
brutal. Yeah.
things were so cheap back then. I mean, that's amazing. He went down to St. Augustine, Florida, and again, the very outset of the Depression, 1931 or thereabouts, and he could get a whole week's lodging at a reasonably good hotel there for a week for $4 total. It was amazing, because they were desperate for customers. Nobody was traveling. It was a depression, and he got, he actually did get to Key West, but he had to go a sort of somewhat circuitous route because the causeway system that was being built had to stop because they had no money. So doing all this traveling during the Depression was just a Herculean feat. He would save up all this money from the winter and the spring, and then dole it out on as little as he could on these travels up and down the eastern seaboard. Um, I mean, he was just determined. He sees because it obviously filled a psychological need for him to be, in touch with these places because they fired his imagination. They kind of rejuvenated him in many ways, so that then he could go back to Providence and sort of process all that information and then bring it out in writing.
Yeah. I have a question in the chat to bring it back around to the film
Sure.
a little bit. The person wants to know a little bit more about the illustrations and animations that are in the movie.
Oh, sure. So I lived in Ottawa before, which is kind of was the mini animation capital. We had a lot of animators there, so I would just befriend a lot of them. So fortunately, they worked for a very low fee, so I got like some of my favorite ones to do it. And a couple, I think my personal favorite would be the music of Eric Zahn one. I thought was maybe the most, well, I like that style the most, like very Adult Swim kind of, but it was done by Alexander Laird, and I think Alex and then Laird. If you check out his website, he has a graphic novel and stuff in that style too. He's a really talented guy. And I met him at TCAF, which is like Toronto Comics and Art, and I forget what it stands for, but it's like a comic exhibition. And then the other ones are just my friends. One is the Color Out of Space, and the Mountains of Madness, the 3D one, is Joop Zondag. And I wanted to try like different styles. And I love the Canadian, I mean, this is very Canadian. I don't know if you guys ever got that show, Reboot. I watched it as a teenager, actually, sadly, but it's like a very 3D animated. And I talked to Yoop, and he's like, "I love that show, Reboot." And I think he's Dutch, so he immigrated here as an older person too. I was like, "Oh, let's do like a reboot Lovecraft stuff." So I was just having fun. I was just playing with it, but I don't know. I was like kind of like my mind was like science fiction, so I was like 3D. I don't know. It's like the future. Lovecraft's predicting, so I wanted to be futuristic. So I was just adding those animations in, and then we were trying to do a hand drawn one, which is again like one of those like Lovecraft B tracks, to bring the analogy of music. That's not really a story that's often talked about, but it is an odd story because Lovecraft does like, I don't know, it's an odd, it's like very against modernity and against like the sin that was committed by like against like the first peoples, First Nations of the America. So I wanted that in like a hand drawn style. So we're trying to just have fun with it. But yeah, I'm quite happy with most of the animations how they turned out.
It's a really nice visual break from the Talking Heads.
Yeah, because there's
Yeah,
a
we talk
lot
a lot.
of there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of shots of buildings, a lot of shots of walking. So I was like, gotta make this visually interesting. And I mean, like, okay, yeah, like I said, it's a very low budget film, but I wanted to do recreations with maybe potentially an actor as well. But like the difficulty of that, like the budget of that, and then I don't know, I almost got to the audition phase, but it's like he's a very odd looking head shape, Lovecraft. It's not easy to find a guy who like kind of looks like him. Like, so I had to get that.
And
I
then
wanted to ask.
you go
I
ahead.
wanted to ask about the use of you used a fair amount of the Christopher Heyerdahl stuff. He is fabulous. I mean that old thing. Who I mean he was that was a Canadian thing, wasn't it? The Out of Mind. That
Yeah, I
TV
used
show.
that in the initial one, SC, but in the new one, I don't have that. But yeah, the initial cuts,
Oh
if anyone wants to watch that, oh yes, yeah, I forgot to send you the latest cut. So sorry.
yeah, I haven't
But
seen this
oh
current
my
cut
god.
actually.
Yeah, so but we initially were looking at this. You can watch it on YouTube. It's called Lovecraft Out of Mind, right, ST?
Yeah.
Uh, it's Canadian, it's from Montreal, actually. I would recommend it. I don't know how it was weird watching it because it's like we have like Telefilm, which funds like I said, CanCon. So it's like it has to be very Canadian. It has to be, I mean, I totally 100% support it. I love it. Some of the best things that would come out of it. But it's like very like, how is the story related to Canada? How is the story related to Canadian history? What does it tell us? Like, what's the correct nice thing it tells Canadians to do? And why does it reinforce Canadian values? And once in a while, something gets snuck in on that where I'm like, what is this? And then it's like, that one was like from the 90s. It was like, it's a guy who, it's like part documentary, part fiction, where a guy finds like a copy of a book and he can talk to Lovecraft in the past. And he looks just like Lovecraft. It's, I forget the actor's name, but you see him in stuff now as well.
Chris Heyerdahl.
Christopher
Yes, yeah,
Heyerdahl,
he nails it. He nails it. He looks like him, sounds like him. So initially I was like, oh, we can maybe use this footage in there, but
No, it was on the Canadian Bravo channel, I believe. It was
yes.
broadcast. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Bravo Facts, I think it's called back in the day, which has since been discontinued. But
Oh.
that was a treat. That was a treat to watch. Some nice Lovecraft CanCon.
Mm.
And then you spoke with how many people did you speak with for this documentary? Did you keep count?
Yeah, I did because I just sent emails to everyone being like, "Oh, you can watch it." Just I think I mean like sometimes documentary will talk to like 40, 50 people and then just like narrow it down. But like I think we talked to maybe like 14 or 15, but and like some of them are people ST put me in touch with, but a lot of them were people I just kind of was like, you know what, I really like their work, and we'll just shoot them an email like Tremblay or Molly Tanzer. It was just like I had an old girlfriend at the time who loved her books, and she's like, hey, we should get in touch with her. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, sure. Why not? And this thing, Lovecraft fandom, very nice people. There, no one, even if someone didn't want to do it, I won't mention names. Some people didn't. They gave me a very nice response and were like, or always pointed me in a direction. It's a good fandom.
I was going to ask if you had any declines to request for interviews.
I did. I don't know if I should mention, but yeah, a few people. Well, mostly it was just like scheduling issues, or a few people. I mean, I understand they had like ailing family members. So I'm like, I'm not going to be like, well, I can still turn up. It's like, yeah, but yeah, it was pretty good.
So how long of a period of time did you do all the interviews, and then how long did it take you to put everything together?
Okay, so yeah, I emailed ST. I graduated film school in 2017. I emailed ST in 2017. We went to Quebec 2018. And then how it was working is like I would apply to a grant, get a little bit of money, shoot some stuff. So it was very stop-start. All the interviews were shot in the year of 2019. And then, 2020 happened, and that kind of like, even for grants and stuff, it was just like, are we giving out grants? We don't know what's happening. Are you allowed to film? So most of 2020 was spent kind of like putting this together. And like I said, like initially it was only about like, yeah, the film it meanders. I'll confess, like maybe that's a point of criticism against it, or I'm anticipating as a point of criticism against it. And that's because like and as is often the case with documentary, when you're making something, like a lot of documentarians don't know where it's going to end, right? Like Michael Moore film, he knows that there's problems with the US healthcare system. So he sets out a film with that thesis, right? And I presume he just fills in the blanks, but the thesis is to show the issues. With me, I didn't even have that. I was like, oh, I like Lovecraft, let's go to these places. And I want to just talk and kind of like feel my own feelings about it, and then talk to ST. And there's interesting, like ST I find is an interesting figure because he's, the canon Lovecraft guy, but he's also you know, someone who you wouldn't expect to be a Lovecraft guy, because grew up, his family immigrated here from India. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting kind of figure. And then like talking to other people who were like, oh, I actually discovered him in Mexico, or I discovered him, you know, I don't even like Lovecraft actually. But I still write in the Lovecraftian mode. So those kind of things were I was just exploring those things. So obviously doing that without having a clear map to the finish, it took a long time in the editing process. So basically I finished it in like late 2020, I would say. And then again, I wasn't really sure if like, should I film more stuff before I started sending it out to, and you guys were nice enough to screen it. But
I think I kind of urged you to say, you know, we don't need just another, you know, chronological view of Lovecraft. You know, okay, here he was born, he grew up here, went to New York, came back, blah blah blah. That's been done before, and it's been done pretty well. There are a couple of good documentaries of that sort out there. I thought, had some really valuable footage that I have never seen in other Lovecraft documentaries about these places that inspired his fiction. Quebec, you know, only indirectly so, but nevertheless, it's, you know, nobody's ever been to Quebec before, you know, in terms of Lovecraft. But I don't ever recall anybody, you know, filming, you know, the Quabbin Reservoir or places like, you know, even the Pickman's Model area in Boston or any number of these other places. So I said that's where the value of this film is, and so I think I tried to sort of steer you in that direction to make it, you know, Lovecraft's sense of place and what that meant to him.
yeah, and I mean, it's one of the happy accidents that happened in the film where that guy came up and it's like, you know, H.P. Lovecraft's ghost haunts me all the time. And that would never have happened if I'd planned, like, okay, we'll just go outside. Like, those kind of things happened. And yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Like, and yeah, even when we went to his grave, it was around Necronomicon, just seeing the different types of people that were coming. It's very odd. Like there were some people with some kids that came and they smoked pot, and I was like, hey, can I interview you? And they're like, absolutely not. We get that camera out of here. I was like, okay, are you guys big HP Lovecraft fans? And they're like, no, we actually aren't. But we just thought it'd be funny to smoke a joint at his grave. I was like, okay, cool. So like, you know, it is odd. It's fun, and those kind of things, like that's like the kind of the fun of documentary. You just go out and film, and like stuff like life does tend to happen. It tends to unfold, and so yeah, that was the joy of it.
There's a question for you in the chat. Could you say more about the symbolism behind the visual of the Lovecraft mask, and if there's any meaning in its transition into color at the end?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that was like I did think that's a very, very good question. Very astute. So yeah, my idea for that was I wanted Lovecraft to be like a statue, right? Like this like idol, like this white, like almost like a Roman statue, like that I assume, right? I become, it's very, very art school, as you can tell, but like very pretentious. But anyway, so like, yeah, I'm like wearing the mask. I am Lovecraft. So the thing is like, he's becoming more and more human where I talk. And the thing is, I think Lovecraft, when I get into the biographical details, and I think SCU will agree with me too, there's the persona of Lovecraft as the gentleman from New England, right? It's not the real, I mean, who is a real person, right? Like let's get weird, but like, it's a mask he puts on, right? It's a persona he assumed because he went through some losing the fortune, losing all the money, obviously his own psychological problems. That persona was, I'm the gentleman from New England. I don't have any money, but I'm from a rich family and I'm the arch conservative from New England. I know a lot of history. I know all these books. So that was the mask that he puts on. And then as you learn more and more, like, yeah, he went through all these difficulties and that was him kind of channeling that. That's what I kind of wanted the mask to represent, right? But like it becoming flesh colored was like, okay, he's human, right? And I have a shot, I thought it was almost too heavy on the symbolism. It's like, but like where the waves come and the mask is even off. So I'm like kind of like facing like at the end, the Cthulhu at the end, I was like, okay, because Lovecraft really prepares you for the future. And the future is horrible. I mean, it's like climate change, or even barring that, it's death, right? We're all gonna die. But like reading Lovecraft does prepare you for death in a way, like good literature, because like any good literature, it prepares you for dying, because he says don't worry about dying too much, because then you're insignificant in the terms of history, like you're an atom really. So nothing, it makes like, oh, if you think like, oh man, I'm a how am I gonna, my mom is mad at me, or whatever, my best friend is mad at me, or so and so said something, or I don't know, how am I gonna pay rent this month? Well, you can zone out a little bit and just think like, okay, you're an insignificant atom in the scheme of history. It kind of makes things bearable in a way, if that makes sense. So that's my very long meandering answer to the symbolism for that. But very astute, whoever said that. A plus for you.
That was thanks to Troy Hillman.
Yeah, Troy, cool.
There's actually another question from Green Herring.
Sure.
Like the fish, but green. I loved seeing you visit the places that inspired Lovecraft's fiction. I did a similar trip myself 10 years ago. Do you have favorite Lovecraftian sites, and can you recommend any lesser known ones that are worth visiting?
Yeah, sure. ST can probably answer this. I did enjoy okay, so Quebec, I would recommend to people because your dollar, if it's the US audience, your dollar is very strong compared to the Canadian one, so you can live very well. Which very tough for Canadians to come to America. To pay an exchange rate, it's brutal. But so you guys can come here. Your dollar will go very far. Quebec, remarkably quite preserved from Lovecraft's visit. They've kept their old town almost identical. There's some. He writes about going to the Ursuline Museum and the French general that was killed, the guy from Last of the Mohicans, Montcalm. They had a skull displayed there. They have since removed this. The French government had a problem with that in the 20s or something and took the skull back. So some stuff is not there, but a lot of it is there. So I would recommend Quebec just because like you can do the travelogue, like you can be like, oh, he's talking about this place and this is here. And so I would recommend that. But the other one, I would say Providence. I mean, I'm sure Green Herring, you've already been to Providence, but I would recommend Providence if you haven't done that too, just because he's written so much about it, and then just walking around. And we interviewed Don Logs, he owns the website, but also he does, I think around Necronomicon, he does a walking tour. And yet he told, I mean, I think you were approached about this too, and I'm not sure if I should talk about it, but like, I won't say who, but like a member of one of a Middle Eastern like dynasty called him and was like, oh, my son is really, the prince is really into Lovecraft, and like they made him like take them on a tour. But I was like, oh, that's such an interesting, like even like a prince in the Middle East is interested in this and wants to do the tour. So I would recommend it because yeah, he really loves Providence, obviously. So there's so much to do in Providence. So yeah, Quebec because it's almost identical, but then afterwards probably Providence. I'm sure.
Let me add two things. That site called the Bear's Den in central Massachusetts, which is part of the inspiration for the Dunwich Horror. It is a really haunting site. I wish we hadn't gotten there. We kind of got there kind of late in the day, and it was getting kind of dark there. So, but I hope you have at least some footage of that still. But it's always been a really really eerie place for me. And the other place to me is Marblehead, Massachusetts. Marblehead is even better preserved now than it was in Lovecraft's day. And oh man, is such a beautiful, I mean, quintessential colonial town, and you can so easily see why Lovecraft was enraptured with it, because it is just incredibly lovely.
It's we went to Marblehead the last time we were, well, not this past time, but the time before that, and found that it was charming and quaint, but it had this weird tinge of something in it. Like you could easily see why Lovecraft based some of his locations on Marblehead. So first, the golden cods over all the doors, and we asked a couple of the locals, like, what is with the cods, the golden cod everywhere? And they all would say basically the same thing, like, well, this town was built on the cod industry. And everyone that we talked to was like, and if you're looking for a good place to eat, I don't remember the name of the restaurant, but they all said like, go eat here. And so at this point we were a little weirded out because of the cods everywhere, because like 5 people told us about the same restaurant. And so we actually went there and we're like, is this where we get sacrificed? Like, what's happening here? And just the big deep bay, you can imagine something monstrous coming out of the water there. Like we joked about the cod god rising out of the bay in Marblehead, but
Well,
but yes,
I don't know
lots of
what
history.
I don't know which restaurant that was, but I had a great lobster meal at one of those Marblehead restaurants, and I was being sacrilegious because of course Lovecraft hated seafood, but I love seafood, and I said, "Sorry, Lovecraft, I can't resist this. I just got to have this." I always remember what he said to E. Hoffman Price. Price wanted a lot of a big fish dinner somewhere, and then Lovecraft says, "Well, while you eat that goddamn stuff, I'm gonna have a sandwich."
Yeah, I do. I did have a pretty good. I still remember it. I had pretty good fish in Marblehead. It was good. It was cod
Yeah.
though. But I did notice the golden cods everywhere, and it is odd, right? It does like you do feel like you're in like a weird town, and then everything is like built in 1600s. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's got a weird vibe. Like I could easily see like a Stephen King thing being set there, and just like yeah, you don't want to stay here after dark.
Yeah,
But
and I don't know if that's inherent to the location or if it's because knowing about Lovecraft's writing and like overlaying that cultist mentality on everything that we see.
Mm.
Let's see, I'm being signaled. So the restaurant that we ate was actually right on the water, and it was kind of a choppy day. So we sat out on the porch, and every time the waves came up, we got splashed a little bit because the porch was right there on the water. Let's see. Sorry, like too many avenues of communication.
yeah, we didn't go to Charleston, which I wish we had because I know he
Uh,
loved
I
Charleston
spent
too.
2 days
Yeah,
in Charleston. It's another wonderful place.
yeah,
Again, better restored than in Lovecraft's day. Yeah, but that's
yeah.
kind of far afield.
So maybe
Yeah.
next film.
Yeah.
Oh, back to Marblehead. We were told that the first cod was made by Paul Revere on
Oh
top
no.
of the church there, and then there was another church that had like a skeleton of a fish as kind of a like a slapback or
Yeah.
clapback.
Yeah, that's good times.
Did you make it down to Florida?
No,
See,
we
that's
didn't
it.
do the South.
We basically New York was it. You could do a whole film on all the places in the mid Atlantic and South. Philadelphia, Baltimore, D.C. Richmond, Virginia, with with both its Poe connection and the Lovecraft connection. Fredericksburg, Charleston, certainly. He even went to Savannah, St. Augustine. Believe it or not, he actually spent some time in Miami Beach. He didn't like it. He thought it was all too modern, but he went to Miami Beach for a day or so, and then all the way to Key West, as I mentioned. And of course, he spent 2 whole summers in 1934 and 35 with Robert H. Barlow in this little town called Cassia, or DeLand, one or the other, and apparently some remnants of the Barlow residents are still there, as I understand. And I've never been there either. So yeah, we got to do a follow up documentary to all the stuff in the
Yeah,
South. That would be
that's the thing. His later, I mean, I don't know, I had to end it somewhere, and then it's already pretty long as it is. But yeah, the later there is Lovecraft's later life is very interesting, and then like yeah, because at that point, like you can from the letters you get, he is very supportive of younger writers, and he's not like doing it for any kind like for any kind of profit or interest in their work, or he's just a very nice guy in that way. He's really helpful to people. So when he's talking to like C.L. Moore about like her fiance dying, or just like younger writers, I find he's very different from when he was younger. Like he is like an elder kind of statesman figure at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that I mean, for a film that I kind of didn't want to talk about that, A, because of time, but also because it's like there's not, I mean, he's still poor, obviously, but there's no friction, there's no drama, right? Like there's no divorce and stuff like that.
But
So
you could do a whole you could do a whole documentary on how Lovecraft influenced these younger writers, and then they kind of paid back by doing great work on their own, not necessarily in the Lovecraftian vein. I mean, I don't think C.L. Moore wrote anything specifically Lovecraftian, but she became a great writer, and she she really owed a lot to Lovecraft, and she knew it. And just corresponded for a year or so, and got a lot out of it. Henry Kuttner, Robert Bloch, Barlow, Donald Wollheim, all these people, who became pretty significant in the field, in the next 2 or 3 generations. And yeah, I mean that still hasn't been really charted in detail. So that's something else one could do sometime.
Yeah, and I've never been to Florida. Never been. I like the one. It's already cold in Canada, so I'm always dying for an excuse to go down there. Well, maybe it might be fun even without a film. But
Well, excellent. I am sorry to have to interject here, but we are running up against a time limit.
Mm.
But it was really interesting hearing about all of the background of the trails and tribulations of getting grants and funding the documentary, and then just getting it done. Just, I think I'm always impressed with anyone who can just set out to make a movie and actually finish it, and then have it, let alone have it be coherent at the end. So thank you
Especially
so
in a
much.
pandemic.
yeah,
know, right?
yeah, it's not the best time to be making a movie. But you know,
Let me mention quickly, I am hopeful that this documentary will be available on DVD next year through Hippocampus Press, where we're working on that. So at the next Necronomicon in August in Providence, we hope that it'll be out in complete DVD format.
Absolutely.
Good. I was going to ask you about that. So great. That's great news.
I haven't talked about it yet, but I really want that to happen. So yes.
In the meantime, are you just doing the festival rounds?
Yeah, I'm gonna try for some like genre festivals in Canada, like I think well, and documentary ones. So like hopefully maybe I missed a lot of the deadlines this year, but like this pandemic, but like maybe Fantasia if they take it, but then even some smaller ones, like I think they have the Calgary Underground Film Festival would be a good one. I've always liked that one, and then Hot Docs and Doxa would be. So if you have friends in Canada that I had to close GeoBlock this for, you can let them know. And yeah, maybe I'm not too familiar with like US festivals for genre. I know you guys, but if there's anyone in the chat who has a festival, wants to show this there, hit me up. My email's on my website.
Okay. And what is your website?
It's a good question. I think if you just Google Caspasha, it's caspasha.com. Let me confirm that. I have not updated it in a long time. It's caspasha.com.
Okay, and spelled exactly the way that.
Yeah, it's QAISPASHA.
Perfect. All right, and you'll update when there's other festival screenings there and any.
Yeah, I'm going to get around to that.
Okay.
That's good.
I know you have a Twitter, but not Facebook or Instagram.
I do have a Twitter, which is private, but if you add me or shoot me a DM, I'll of course add you. And then yeah, I have an Instagram too. It's Kaz Pasha, but with an extra S because there's another Kaz Pasha.
Okay.
So yeah, feel free to add me. But I am kind of a Luddite, so the best way to get at me is still email, which is on my website. So yeah, my friends and family hate me talking about Lovecraft, as I'm sure many of yours do as well. So I'm always happy to talk Lovecraft. I relish the opportunity to do so. So please reach out if anyone wants to chat.
Perfect. And ST, what are you working on now? What do we look forward to?
We have just obtained scans of the complete Lovecraft letters to Frank Belknap Long after so many years. We finally got them. I mean, Brown University has them, and they provide us with scans. And we are now working on a big edition of the joint correspondence between Frank and Lovecraft, and it could be out as early as next year. Might be the year after, but an incredible bit of correspondence. I mean, just amazing, and that will be pretty close to the end of the whole Lovecraft letters sequence. We have several other volumes that are also pretty close to being ready. And at that point, can you imagine the complete Lovecraft letters? And then we'll make them somehow available electronically. We're not sure how we're going to do that yet, but then you can have access to every single Lovecraft letter on your computer, and you can do all sorts of searches and things like that. And that'll be an amazing tool. I hope that'll again continue to foster scholarship on Lovecraft, because you just learn so much from those letters.
We talked to Peter Cannon. We talked to him in the film. He's very close with Frank Belknap Long, and I found it actually him talking about it quite. I didn't put it in the film, obviously for time, and then because then you have to explain who Frank Belknap Long is and his whole story. But very, very moving. And his life was quite sad too.
Yeah.
But like he died quite destitute as well. But like his relationship with Lovecraft is very, very touching. The way they talked about each other and were good friends. And I think Steve, you got to actually meet him as well, right?
I met him several times. Yeah, over course of like 15 years I knew him. Anyway,
yeah, so I wish someone had done a doc on talk on him because it is interesting. Like his life is sad, but quite cool as well.
Mm.
Interesting. Well, thank you both for taking time out of your day and schedules and being here with us and our audience. To our audience, this will be recorded, so if you came in the middle of it or missed any of it, you'll be able to rewatch it later on. And same for you, Cass and ST, if you'd like to watch it later on, it'll be available through the Eventive portal,
Okay, it
and
was very
we
fun
can
to be
send you
here.
the link as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. And
Well,
nice seeing
thank
you
you
guys
so
too.
much.
Yes. We'll be in touch, everybody.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Oh, as